So good afternoon. I'm Michelle Wagner with NAMI New Hampshire, and I work on the first episode Psychosis Early Serious Mental Illness Initiative. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Mental Health and Suicide Prevention for Black and LGBTQ+ Youth, Data, Initiatives, and Actionable Hope. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to find it on the education page of onwardnh.org. There is a short evaluation we're asking folks to complete after today's presentation. You'll also receive a follow-up email with links to both the survey and the recording. This is a Zoom webinar, which means your camera and microphone are off. The Q&A feature is working, so please enter any questions you have there. We'll save time at the end to make sure we get to all your questions and/or we'll answer them as we go along. My colleague Jace Troy and I will work together to get that done. And with us today are two individuals who can speak to this important topic. We have with us Sean Perry, founder and president of We Are Hope, and Jessica Goff, who is the coordinator of community programming and engagement at Seacoast Outright. We welcome you both. So now to lay the foundation for our work today. In the US, suicide is a serious public health problem and is the second leading cause of death in teens. One underexamined aspect of rates of suicide in youth is the impact on Black and LGBTQ+ youth. Since the pandemic, the number of suicidal thoughts and behaviors of Black youth has increased. For the first time in recent history, Black children are nearly twice as likely to die by suicide than white children. I'm going to say that one more time. Black children are nearly twice as likely to die by suicide than white children. That's why today's webinar is so important. More than 2.5 times as many Black boys died by suicide as Black girls, but the annual increase among girls, 6.6%, is more than twice what it was for boys. So we know that we're losing Black girls more quickly than we had in the past. National research shows that 42% of LGBTQ+ youth ages 13 to 24 considered suicide in the past year. So 42% considered suicide in the past year, and 62% reported symptoms of major depressive disorder in the past 2 weeks. According to a national survey by the Trevor Project, adolescents of color who identify as LGBTQ may be especially at risk of a suicide attempt. So as you can see, this is an extremely important topic, and we're glad to have our panelists here to have a discussion about it. So with that, Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what's happening with this topic and your part in it.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Perry, president, co-founder, and executive director of We Are Hope, which is a nonprofit organization that brings anxiety education, trauma-informed interactive services, suicide prevention, collaborative problem solving, and emotional CPR to individuals in schools struggling with finding support within the school system at an affordable rate. So in our work, one of the things that we have learned is this crisis that we're seeing has only continued to grow. So I'm going to pull up some slides, share them briefly with everyone, if that's okay, and kind of just build a foundation of this topic. Go through them together. Hopefully it can be a little bit interactive. I know that you guys can't hear us. I can't see you, but I'm hoping that when I ask some questions, you can go ahead and put it into the chat, and Jace can maybe read those off to me, just to kind of give a little bit of insight as to what we're thinking as a group. So. So what I want to discuss today with everyone is just a couple of things. The suicide rate increase, what has changed, and the supports, right? And the supports that we need as a community, and what it is that we can do. And I think being able to look at what's transpired and what's continued to transpire over the years is going to be really important. Right now, over the last 14 years, we've seen a significant increase in mental health challenges for Black youth in particularly. Now, there's a lot of discussion, and when I met with Michelle a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of discussion around, or last week rather, why is that? What's different? What's changed? And one of the things that I've noticed in my work and that I've learned that as far as what's changed is that the mental health landscape and the ability to have conversations around mental health has significantly changed. And in talking about a population of individuals who typically would not be allowed to have these conversations, I think has opened up, in some sense, for some people, what they might call a Pandora's box, right? What I would call an awakening of true emotion, if that makes sense to everyone. And so when you have an awakening of true emotion, then you're dealing with things that you were taught to suppress over generations, right? I know that specifically, you know, in the Black community that I was brought up in, when I say, and I want to be clear, right? When I say the Black community, I can only talk about the Black community in which I was raised. I cannot speak for all African Americans and all Black people throughout this country. I would think that that would be unfair to do so, because African Americans in the North have a certain way about them. African Americans in the South have a certain way about them, and all the way around the country. And then you have pockets within that are completely different. But we have some very specific nuances in the sense of, my father was from the South, his family was from the South, and one of the things that we just didn't do was talk about our feelings. We didn't do that. It was inappropriate. And I think more than being inappropriate, it was, we had to be stronger emotionally than the person next to us, because historically we were being beaten down, and we needed to show how strong we were and how we could manage that. And so I think, as a Black, I want to kind of get a little bit personal here, as a Black youth myself, I really struggled with that. Really struggled with that. I had high anxiety all the way through high school, being told that I had to be a good athlete, right? Not so much from my father, but from my community. That was the expectation, that I was a good athlete. At least that was the pressures that I felt. And I really had kind of an identity crisis as well, because my mother's white. So I struggled with a lot of mental health challenges growing up. And in my early, in the early 2000s, I attempted to take my own life. So as a survivor of suicide, these topics are very near and dear to me and close to me, because understanding that without proper supports, what that can lead to, if unchecked. And so one of the things that we've noticed specifically, when they did this in 2019, right before COVID, was that we've seen a significant increase in hospital visits between male and female youth between the ages of 12 and 17. And I thought that was interesting, because I don't know about you, but this isn't something that's nationally posted, right? This isn't something that we're having this conversation with, you know, within a school setting, or, you know, on a normal basis. However, in the mental health space in which I work, these are the conversations that we are actually having, right? That we're saying, you know, so-and-so has gone to the hospital for X, Y, and Z. So-and-so has gone to the hospital for X, Y, and Z. But the reality is that the school or the students that are within that space don't often know what's actually happening, and families are covering it up, and so forth and so on. And so being able to see this data, that there are things that are happening, and that we were seeing such an increase. And if we're looking at over 1,000 people going to the hospital in a week to the ER, I would say that we have a significant issue within this country in regards to the fact that we're feeling disconnected and alone, and we're not connected to what's actually transpiring. And so if we look at some other data written recently in the study of pediatrics, and I'm not going to read all this, but I'll leave it up on the screen for you guys to go ahead and read it. And while you're all reading this, what I'd like you to do in reading this data is I want you to kind of connect with what you're reading. Okay. And what I mean by connect with what you're reading is I want you to identify what emotion comes up for you when you see this. And if you can go ahead and just name an emotion, put it into the chat. Jace, if you can read off some of those emotions for me as they put it into the chat, that'd be great. Just to see how we're connecting with this, because if we can't connect with this, then we can't help solve the problem. Does that make sense to everybody? We've got to be able to connect with the problem. We have to understand that there's a discrepancy, or not a discrepancy, that there is an issue within the way that a population of young people are being supported in our country in particular. And the fact that they don't believe that they have the supports necessary to reach out for help. So I want you guys just to think about that for a moment and put in the chat what it is that's kind of coming up for you. What are some emotions that kind of resonate with you that when you read this?
So Sean, I do just want to let folks know the chat isn't working at the moment, but they can put it in the Q&A. So please go ahead and put it there.
Okay.
So Sean, some of the things that are coming up, people say that they feel sadness, they feel despair and confusion. There are feelings of, it's not letting me scroll. Anxiety, hopelessness, anger, abandonment. Someone said that it's upsetting and motivating. Someone said dismay, shock, frustration, sadness, but also unsurprised.
Yeah.
Sadness and disappointment, desire to help but not sure how, hopeful for change, motivated, shock, worry, fear.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Jace, for reading those off. And thank you, everyone who took a moment to kind of look inside. You know, one of the things in my body of work in particular is, is really teaching people how to connect with what they're feeling, right? Getting them to identify what that emotion is. And the reason that is so important is because when we do that, we're able to connect with ourselves, right? So I'm not sure if you guys know this, but we are the most disconnected generation in human history. It's the most disconnected time. When I say generation, I mean period in time in human history. The most disconnected. We are disconnected from ourselves. We are disconnected from our family members, and we are disconnected from society. And so one of the reasons for disconnection is because it takes connection to be connected. And in order to be connected, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. We are a less vulnerable society than before, meaning we're not willing to share our vulnerability. Now, what do you think happens with a young Black boy or Black girl or Black trans individual that does not, or that cannot feel vulnerable, right? That doesn't believe that they can trust anyone? Well, I'll tell you what happens. You're looking at you're at the screen. Sorry, I didn't think I just went back. You're at the screen, right? This is what happens. This is the product of kids not feeling, or individuals not feeling safe. Does that make sense? So what's changed, right? You know, what has changed in our society? And again, I think I touched on it a little bit. I think we're now having these conversations. Black and brown kids are now having these conversations that they were never able to have before. There are spaces slowly that are opening up where they can have these conversations. But the issue is that, at least what my belief is, that the issue is that who do they talk to? Right? So in working with a lot of Black youth over the years, there's always that hard exterior with those young men. There's always that hard exterior with those young ladies. And one of the things that I can tell you is that they're not showing any weakness. They don't want to show any weakness, because in some instances, in some areas, in some cultures where they're located, weakness gets you dead. And so I can't tell you how I'm feeling, because then so-and-so is going to take advantage and exploit my weakness. I mean, we're literally living by mob rules and thug rules in some areas. Now not in all areas, right, for all Black children, but for some. And so being able to have these dialogues and have these conversations is so vital to the progress of breaking the stigma around mental health challenges as a whole, and specifically around suicidality. I mean, I'll give you a for instance again. When I attempted to take my life, I was 24 going on 25. I had already had 4 children. Didn't feel life was worth living for whatever reasons I was currently dealing with at that time. And I didn't tell anyone about this until 2 years ago. I'm 45 years old now. And I've been supporting other people for many years. But there was still a shame around that I was dealing with. I openly talk about it now, as you can see, because that's helped me in my healing journey to help other people in a more authentic way. So when we talk about what's changed, we have some key factors as well, right? We've got coronavirus, obviously, right? But we have this huge feeling of hopelessness and loneliness in our society, in our communities. And we have youth that are unwilling to be vulnerable or to connect in an authentic way. And so what I mean by that is, we'll have youth that connect on a very surface level, and that will give a little bit of vulnerability, just enough so there is that surface level connection. But to go deep inside, we all have to, this is part of the human connection, not just these individuals, but in order to get truly vulnerable, we have to work through that shame and that guilt that we feel. And the reality is, we don't want to. We don't want to. And in some instances, that shame and guilt is so strong by family upbringing, by generational trauma, by many different factors, that there's no access for these children to get that support, right? A really great, for instance, is we're down in Arkansas. I won't say what school, I'll just say in Arkansas, at a school. And the level of access for these young people is insane, right? What I mean by that is, we were supposed to bring in 6 coaches into a school district. They told us they only wanted 2 after they had agreed to 6, because they wanted to use services and supports that were already readily available within the community, except that these services and supports were after you get in trouble and then you're adjudicated, right? So the supports then create more hopelessness and loneliness and the inability to trust other individuals, that these children don't have real access to supports and are contemplating self-harm and suicide because no one understands them, because no one will support them. when they have the ability to have supports preemptively to all of this, right? So I think that's, you know, this is one of the issues. Our society says we want to wait till a problem occurs, specifically in the Black community. We want to wait till a problem occurs, then we want to address it, right? Then we also have to understand that some of these factors, and it was hard to get well, I guess we can use this picture down here with this young man being arrested. We have to understand that 9 times out of 10, a Black child's behavior is the focus and not what's caused the behavior, right? So the Black child is a disruptive kid in the school. They're the one who's the class clown in the school. They're the ones who are getting in trouble in the school, and they get suspended, while other students get to go see the school counselor, get diagnosed for anxiety, get diagnosed for depression, get diagnosed for whatever may else, you know, eating disorder, whatever else may be going on. But they're getting diagnosis while Black and brown children are being punished and being misdiagnosed, right? So that's one of the other issues, that a Black child is going to be more likely to be misdiagnosed. Now, when that happens, and you know that you're not being a bad kid, but that there's something inside that's going on that you're struggling with emotionally, and no one will listen to you, would you or would you not all agree that that would in itself cause hopelessness, cause loneliness? Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a really great, for instance. I'll tell you, I'm a poster child of messed up, right? Like when I was a kid, I fought every single day in elementary school and into middle school, almost every single day, because someone was saying a racial slur, right? Now, my mother would tell me, Sean, go tell the teacher. My father would tell me, you can't let no man, no other person belittle you like that. You need to stand up for yourself. And if he puts his hands on you, beat him up. So I was in a lot of fights. Well, I was the kid who was in fights, but not because I was being mentally abused by my classmates, right? And belittled as a human being by my classmates, but I had to go to counseling because I was a fighter and they wanted to know where my anger came from. This was my childhood, right? So I know that if I dealt with that, I know that I'm not the only one to deal with that. I know that there are thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of young men and women that are currently dealing with that as I'm talking right now. So I think there's a lot of different factors that have caused what we're currently seeing. But I think some of the solutions are simple. You'll notice here on this middle line, break the stigma, break the stigma, break the stigma, break the stigma, right? That is the main focus here, right? We have got to constantly break this stigma. And I believe the way that we do that is we have to open up a conversation, right? We have to have a discussion about this. It has to be something that we are not afraid to talk about. We also need to have social emotional learning for K through 12 students. It should not be K through 3rd grade and then we're done. Our youth are struggling currently to be able to properly identify what it is that they're feeling. When I work with a 17-year-old and they can't tell me what they feel today, we have a problem. When they can't identify that emotion, we have a problem, right? It's not necessary. I mean, is it mom and dad's issue as well? Yes, but we have to remember that the school spends more time with the child than the parent does 9 times out of 10. So it is part of it should be part of the educational system to teach this to our kids, so they truly can learn to understand how to identify what it is that they're feeling when they're feeling it, so that when they're feeling it, they can communicate it in a space that it's healthy, that they don't have to go home and feel alone in this. We need to have anxiety education. And the reason that I put anxiety education in is because I believe that anxiety is the root cause to all behaviors that we see. And not only do I believe it, I know it because science and data backs that statement up, right? We have a thought, that thought creates an emotion, that emotion creates a behavior. If you see a behavior, you want to know why it happened, ask the person what they were feeling. If they're not sure what they were feeling, ask them what they were thinking. What they thought created that emotion, which created that behavior. It's very, very simple. Thoughts create emotions, which impact or influence behavior. Okay. And so if I have a thought about a specific situation and or i.e. my interpretation of it or my perception, I'm going to create an emotion over time that I believe fits with that situation. And then I'm going to create a very specific behavioral outcome, or I'm going to have a very specific behavioral outcome that I believe protects me best. So if we can teach kids and adults how to manage anxiety, then we can actually help them work through all these other feelings that they're feeling, specifically in the Black community, because there's no education around this. We have an increase, people, I will say it, an increase. You'll go back to the slide, 144% as data was continued over since 2019. This isn't going away, it's only growing. And we have to start teaching people in the Black and brown communities to be able to support themselves, but most importantly, realize that supports are available, that they're readily available, but we've got to put them in place for them. And then trauma training, right? Trauma training is something that all human beings need, but specifically in underserved populations and communities. Because we have so much unresolved natural trauma that has occurred for hundreds of years, coupled with all new trauma that exacerbates it. And we're supposed to wake up every day and go about our business and work twice as hard than our white counterpart so that we can get to where we need to be. Those are the statistics. That's the data. That's the mindset of Black youth. I have to work twice as hard to be successful so that I can be recognized than the person that's next to me. That in itself is traumatic. And then when I accept a scholarship, right, that gives me a full scholarship for whatever reason because of my income, someone's telling me that I only got into school because of the color of my skin. So I can't win. So now going to college, I already feel like a nobody and I feel hopeless and I feel alone, right? These are the ways that we're starting out. There's all these little nuances that people aren't realizing that are happening within the communities, are happening within our lives, that are continuing to cause these levels of pain and trauma throughout it. And finally, we've got we have emotional CPR, building human connection, and that is the modality of the practice of teaching ourselves and others how to support each other through emotional crisis on a heart-to-heart level, really bringing back the human connection piece, which I believe is really, really missing within our community. We have to be able to be vulnerable. I'm going to stop sharing here. We have to be able to be vulnerable so that we can learn to connect in moments that are difficult. We have to be willing to be vulnerable, but we have to be willing also as a society to realize that we have a significant problem with suicide in the Black community, and we can no longer continue to look away at this problem. And we have to address it head on in the way of boots on the ground, right? I don't want to see another policy. I don't want to hear about another something being written that doesn't do anything for right this second. Because by the time you go and write that policy, get it passed, 2,000 more Black youth have died. What are you going to do today, right now, to support these communities that are struggling? That's what we need to do. And that's the reason that we created We Are Hope. Because I get asked all the time, have you gone to the State House? Have you tried to get your work through the state and wherever you're at? And first thing I say is absolutely not. I have zero time to wait. And our kids have zero time to wait for people in suits to decide whether or not they're valuable enough, their lives are valuable enough to pass a bill. We have to do the work today. And so for those of you who are on this call and who are listening, I would encourage you to do this. Don't wait for your senator, right? Don't wait for your congressperson. Go help someone today if it's in your wheelhouse. Because we hear this all the time, call your senator, call your congressman. No, I'm not calling anybody. I'm getting off my couch, I'm getting off my butt, and I'm going to do the work. Or I'm going to support an organization that's doing the work that I can't do. One way or the other, boots on the ground work is how we address this issue appropriately and make sure that all children, regardless of income, have access to good mental health supports and that we can start saving some lives. So that's what I have.
That was fabulous, Sean. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Jess, and she can add to that conversation for sure.
I don't know how to follow that up, but we are going to do our very best. All righty, let me scooch this. There we go. All righty. So hi, everybody. My name is Jessica. I use she, her pronouns, and I work over at Seacoast Outright. I am our coordinator of community programming and engagement. So just a little bit about Seacoast Outright. We are a nonprofit organization that supports LGBTQ+ youth and their allies in the Seacoast area and beyond. So what that looks like are support groups for middle and high school students who are LGBT, and those happen weekly, virtually, and in person. We also have a resource library. Folks often call us and we provide a lot of informal referrals. We also do support for caregivers and parents of LGBT youth, and we do community and outreach like I am doing today. So if you want to learn more, feel free to visit our website. We do all sorts of fun things every year, including Portsmouth Pride. Alrighty, so some foundational concepts before we start the conversation on LGBT issues. So a lot of the core terms that I might be using are often conflated with each other. So we often assume because it says LGBTQIA+, that it is all one concept when it isn't. So there are really two sides of the coin. And the first coin is gender. So on the gender side, we have sex assigned at birth, which is when an infant is born, they say, congratulations, it's a fill in the blank. Now, often that is boy or girl. However, there are many folks who are born intersex, which is something that we often don't talk about. So there are a number of people born every year who don't fit neatly into either boy or girl in terms of sex. And so it really isn't a binary. We then go into gender identity, which is how we feel inside. So that might be cisgender, which is when I was born, they said I was female, and I now still identify as female. That means that I am cisgender. That aligns. Now, for folks who it doesn't align, they might identify as transgender, non-binary, which just means that what the doctor said at birth is different than how the person identifies internally and how they feel. Now, that is similar, but also different than gender expression, which is how we show ourselves to the world. Now, it's important to note that gender identity and gender expression might not always overline exactly. So my favorite example here is Prince. So Prince had all sorts of fun outfits that we may deem more feminine, right? Now, today we might assume, oh my gosh, they're transgender. But that wasn't the case for Prince, right? They identified as male. However, their gender expression was more female at times. So it's really important not to make assumptions. A lot of times folks will see what a youth is wearing and make an assumption about their pronouns or who they are. So it's really, really important that we don't make assumptions and that we always start asking those questions, because what's really important here is the gender identity and affirming that for folks. On the other side of the coin, we have romantic and sexual orientation, which is who you want to be with, who you want to date, who you want to be intimate with, etc. So one is who you are, one is really who you want to be with, if anybody. So they are two sides of the same coin. One can be transgender and straight, one can be gay and cisgender. There are all sorts of different combinations there. And there are thousands of terms. So if you don't know all of them, that's okay. Google is a fantastic resource. Just be aware of what you're reading. Alrighty, so another thing to note here is that more and more folks are identifying as LGBT. And that is really, really important as we recognize the importance of having these conversations. Folks may say, well, there's only one trans kid in my school, but odds are there are likely more trans kids in your school now than there were a few years ago. And folks sometimes construe this as folks aren't really transgender or aren't really LGBT. when in reality, I like to compare it to left-handedness. So if you looked at a chart of left-handedness based on generations, it would probably look similar to this, right? So you may say, well, more and more people are transgender, when in reality, just like left-handedness, folks are now able to more and more be themselves, versus it being taken away from them, right? So folks have always been born left-handed, but they weren't allowed to express that to the world. So more and more folks are identifying as LGBT, so it's really important to have this conversation. Alrighty, so here are the upsetting outcomes really that we're talking about. So similar to the BIPOC community, LGBT kids are at high risk of negative mental health outcomes. So 45% of LGBT kids considered suicide in the past year, 14% attempted, and 1 in 5 trans youth attempted in the past year. This isn't lifetime. So if you know 5 transgender kids, 1 of them has attempted suicide in the past year. That is a startling statistic. 73% of LGBT youth report symptoms of anxiety, and 93% are worried about anti-transgender legislation. So it's really important to note here that there are 2 aspects. So it's really important to have that boots on the ground. With LGBT issues, there is a lot of harmful legislation coming out. So it's important to be involved in all of the realms to make sure that folks are able to be affirmed. So there's been a big movement to avoid adults in the community's ability to connect with youth who are LGBT. So making sure that policies are there is really important. Another aspect is that LGBT youth are more likely to misuse substances, and that rate is accelerated for youth who have been exposed to conversion therapy. So we know that when youth are not accepted, when they are exposed to traumatic experiences that tell them that who they are is wrong, it increases negative mental health outcomes, as to be expected. So what's really important here is that discrimination is linked to negative mental health outcomes. So there is nothing inherent in being LGBT that makes youth more likely to face negative outcomes, right? So it really is linked to LGBT youth being exposed to a lot of discrimination. So 91% of youth in New Hampshire heard gay used in a negative way. 70% heard other homophobic remarks. More than half experienced harass or assault at school. 44% experienced at least one form of discrimination due to school policies and practices. So not just from other students. Youth may feel that they are facing it from every direction. We also know that 28% of LGBT youth have experienced homelessness or housing instability, and more than half of those youth who run away report doing so because they were mistreated for being LGBT. So it's really important to note that folks still face a lot of discrimination and are at times kicked out of their homes, or they run away because they are being mistreated at home. And that is a really important statistic to note because we know that it's linked to those negative mental health outcomes. We also know that youth who have been threatened or harmed are more likely to attempt suicide. So these are really all startling statistics, but they are subject to change. So this isn't inherent. It's really about the discrimination that youth are facing and a perceived lack of support. So here's some more data. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2019 asked youth about their sexual orientation and also asked them how many times they attempted suicide in the past 12 months. And if you look at this chart, heterosexual youth, this first little blue bar is 1 attempt. So heterosexual youth had about 2 attempts in the past year. Gay youth had over 6. Bisexual youth, more than 10% had said that they had had more than 1 attempt. So as you can see, these rates are high, right? And they are higher for gay and lesbian, bisexual youth. I think the most startling thing here is that the yellow bar is more than 6 attempts in the past year. 6 attempts. So you can see for heterosexual youth, that number is quite low, but it's higher for gay and lesbian, bisexual, and youth who are unsure. So as you'll note, bisexual youth and youth who are not sure actually faced higher rates than gay and lesbian youth. And I think that this really speaks to a lack of feeling accepted and not really feeling like one fits in the straight community or the LGBT community, and feeling kind of excluded by multiple groups, which is really important to know. Right. But things can change, right? So I think there's a little glimmer of hope in here, is that trans and non-binary students who have access to GSAs, supportive teachers, inclusive curriculums, and anti-bullying policies have fewer missed days of school and feel like they belong more. These youth, when their pronouns are respected, they attempt suicide at half the rate. So if you have those 5 kids, right, who have that one of those in 5 have attempted in the past year, we could decrease that by 50%, right? By just making sure that we respect youth's pronouns. Having one supportive adult in a youth's life also decreases the rate of suicide attempts by 40%. And this is really important because this doesn't have to be a parent, this doesn't have to be a teacher, this can be a coach or anybody in a youth's life. One person seeing a youth and saying, I see you and I believe you, that decreases suicide attempts by 40%, which is huge. So another thing we can see here is that when schools have GSAs and safe spaces, as well as professional development for educators, all youth benefit, not just LGBT youth. So LGBT youth specifically show decreases in depression and suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts, but actually all youth show that. So we know that creative and inclusive environments benefits everyone. All right, so here are some other strategies. So what I like to say is that suicide prevention for the LGBTQ+ community is the suicide prevention strategies that I know that Michelle is going to cover in a little bit, those really big overarching strategies, plus affirmation. That really is suicide prevention for the LGBT community. So in that affirmation section is recognizing bias, speaking up against intolerance, and addressing bullying. That is critical. A lot of teachers I've spoken to specifically say, how do I address when a kid is being bullied for being LGBT? And I like to say, well, how do you address it when a kid is being bullied for their race, or a kid is being bullied for their socioeconomic status, or a kid is being bullied for a whole host of things? It's really important that folks learn how to apply those skills. It's also really important, as I said, to avoid assumptions based on gender expression. Youth really have to come out consistently when they are not straight and cisgender. They often have to every day really come out to folks and feel safe to do so. So it's really important that we're not making assumptions. Another strategy is to practice using gender neutral terminology, which really speaks to including kids in the conversation. So if I am talking to a group of people and I say, boys and girls, those non-binary kids in the room might say, great, I'm not even being included in the language. You don't even address me. So being able to move towards terms like folks or everyone or kiddos or whatever fits your style. Another important thing here is not assuming family composition. So often folks working with kids will say, bring this home to your mom and dad. Now, not only does this exclude kids who have 2 moms or 2 dads, it also excludes kids who are living with a single parent, right? It also excludes kids who might be living in a foster family, who might be living with grandma, who might be living in a host of other situations. So being inclusive can really include, bring this home to your grownups, bring this home to your caregivers, bring this home to the adult in your life. So really being able to broaden that conversation. As I said, asking, telling, and respecting pronouns is huge. And a way that you can do this is, how I introduced myself. So when I started this, I said, hi, my name is Jessica. I use she, her pronouns. That really opens the door, right? So if there's a kid in front of me who might say, I'm not sure if I can tell them, I'm not sure if I'll be accepted. I've just shared my pronouns, which shows that I'm at least going to be open when they share theirs. Another critical point is do not out anyone without their consent. I'm going to say that again. Do not out anyone without their consent. Do not assume that people are out to everyone. Just because a youth tells you about who they are doesn't mean that other people in their life know. And by outing them to folks, by telling other people in their life before it's safe to do so, can cause youth to be kicked out, to be subject to violence, to be subject to a host of other negative outcomes. So it's really important that youth are empowered to tell others in their lives if and when it is safe to do so. As with all youth, it's important to know the signs of suicide, of depression, of anxiety, and to take those concerns seriously, as well as facilitating access to mental health care. So a big issue in our state right now is that there are a shortage of clinicians, and I think we all know this. This is particularly pronounced for folks who are looking for clinicians who specialize in certain populations. So as I know is also true with the BIPOC community, LGBTQ plus folks have a really hard time finding therapists who are competent in dealing with gender identity issues and sexuality issues. There are a handful of fantastic people in the state who have great training, but their wait lists are years long, right? And our youth cannot always wait that long. So it's really important that we get folks access to that training and we help therapists have that information. And I know that's also a concern in the BIPOC community. I had a parent reach out to me recently and said, you know, my son would like a Black male therapist who specializes in LGBT issues. And I was like, that would be fantastic. I am not sure if that exists in New Hampshire. If anyone on this call knows someone, put it in the chat or the Q&A, because I would love to have their name. But it's difficult right now, right? And so I think it's really important that even when youth are referred to therapy, sometimes therapists can cause harm from lack of understanding. So really being aware of that and where we are referring kids and being able to prepare them for that. Some other easy strategies are displaying symbols of allyship in your space. So if you wear a lanyard, have a little pride flag, having little stickers in your room just shows folks that you are going to be a safe person to come to. If a youth is being harassed or is dealing with something, then them being able to come to you is huge. Something else is celebrating differences. I think we often like to ignore difference and say, let's treat all kids the exact same way. And that is not always helpful, right? We know that different populations face very unique discrimination, very unique triggers, very unique situations, and being able to say, yes, we are all different, and that is beautiful and fantastic. And showing that through representation in books and being able to have that conversation. Another huge thing is advocating for inclusive policies and legislation. Like I said, there's been a slew of extremely harmful policies in our state. And I know a lot of the youth who I've spoken to have come to our groups and have, you know, we haven't asked, they've just brought up the fact that this legislation is terrifying for them. So the idea that their parent might be called the second that they tell their teacher, even though they know that their parent's going to kick them out. The idea that them getting care under 18 would automatically make them subject to removal by DCYF, all of these really terrifying things that are happening. It's really important that we're aware because they do have a huge impact. So being able to be on the ground and have those important interactions every day, as well as being aware of the environment and being able to understand who you're voting for and what you're doing and advocating on that level as well. And then just some more resources. So I'm going to make sure that Michelle and Jace have these slides after, so I assume they will send them out. But always feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions. And I'm excited for some questions.
Thank you, Jessica. That was wonderful. And I'm wondering in the group here, if there are comments on each other's presentations or some overlap that people are seeing. I did just put in the Q&A, someone asked, they thought it was BIPOC. You had said BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So overlap between these two communities. Sean, any comments from you? You're muted, friend.
Well, I mean, I think we have natural overlap, right? I mean, the human experience is the human experience. Trauma is trauma, right? You know, I don't believe in big trauma, little trauma. I believe trauma impacts us all differently. So it's trauma, right? Feeling hopeless and alone is hopeless and alone, right? So I think, you know, we have this, I think in particular, we have this problem in this country where we want to separate everybody, right? Which in some instances makes sense for specific data pools and things like that. But the reality is that the human experience is always going to be the human experience. That's the one thing that we can all relate to. That's the one thing we can always relate to, the human experience. Because sadness is sadness. Doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what gender you are, doesn't matter where you live. It's sadness. Happiness is happiness, so forth and so on. So I think there's a lot of commonality, right? There's a lot of overlap because, you know, we're talking about two communities that are underserved, right? So in that, right? That's our experience that we share together currently.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that there is a lot of natural overlap, and we often like to silo and say that, the Black community deals with these rates and the queer community deals with these rates. But it's really important that there are BIPOC folks who are LGBT. Like that happens, right? We have all sorts of identities in our lives, right? Our ability status, our socioeconomic status, our language, our nation of origin, all sorts of things impact who we are, how we see the world, and how others see and treat us. So it's really important to recognize that there are overlapping oppressions there. And the folks who are often most subject to violence are trans women of color, often are extremely prone to violence, right? We know that trans women have higher rates of violence against them, but we also know that Black women have high rates of violence against them. And so when you put those two together, there are extremely high rates. And so recognizing that overlap is huge. I think some of the solutions also overlap. We both spoke about competent healthcare providers. We both spoke about connection and seeing people for who they are. We both spoke about addressing bullying and making sure that youth have trauma-informed care. And again, discrimination is trauma. It is trauma. And especially when that's combined with other types of trauma, it's really important to be aware of that and not to just ignore it and kind of go with the flow. It's really important to recognize that, and for youth to feel like they fit somewhere and they have somebody who sees them. And I think it's important that we could all be that somebody. So that I think helps with my sense of helplessness sometimes, is that I can be that person for a youth.
And when Sean was talking about boots on the ground, I'm not going to call my legislators, I want to do something now. I think that's a really important point, that you can be that person for a young person. You can be the adult in that young person's life to help them get through. Sean?
Yeah, I think, I teach emotional CPR, and one of the things I hear from adults who are coming in, or kids that I'm teaching in youth emotional CPR, is I'm not trained to take care of other people's problems. And I say, you are trained to be a human being, right? I think that the things that people don't realize is you don't need a master's degree or a PhD to be a human being. You don't need that to learn how to love somebody else, right? We have fooled ourselves in this society a lot of times that you have to have this title and all these letters after your name to say that you can support somebody. See, what people forget is that support isn't telling someone how to fix their lives and how to work through their problem. Support is just being there, just being present in the moment when someone needs you. And there's not really anybody on this planet that can't do that. Most people can. And so we're not asking educators or even parents, right, to go and try to fix or whatever they believe that they may need to do. We're just saying, validate, be present, and be human. That's it. That's all you have to do. If you can do that, you will save more lives than you believe that you ever could. Because a lot of times people just want to be heard in that moment, in those moments of hopelessness. And if you could just be there and just be present, you'll save a life. You'll save a life.
And I just want to add in here about asking the question around suicide, because we know this with suicide prevention, that we have to point blank ask the question.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about boots on the ground steps we can take, that's one of them. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you ever wish you weren't alive? Do you wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Have you thought about taking your life? We have to point blank ask these questions and not be afraid to do so. So Sean, there is a question here for you from Chris. What are some better ways for a white person to mindfully join BIPOC advocacy groups in rural New Hampshire? And also, I agree that direct action is better than waiting on a political cure. You also had a thumbs up from Tammy.
All right. Yeah. So that's a great question. And I think that's a common question. I think, the best thing you could do is join it like any other group, right? Go in with true, pure intentions, right? But most importantly, go in there willing to learn
Mhm.
about what you don't know. I'll give you a really great, for instance. So, you know, because of my work, I've, you know, in the last several years, I work with a lot of LGBTQ kids, a lot. Now, that is not my forte or expertise of work. It's just not. But because of my work, you know, we work a lot of times hand in hand, and I support a lot of those young kiddos. And I ask so many questions so that I can learn. And I'll tell you what, when you are genuinely curious and open, people will talk to you and they'll appreciate the fact that you're trying to learn. And so, you know, the best advice I can give you is to just be honest, just be pure at heart, and go in asking questions, wanting to learn, and don't try to do too much, right? Just learn from people that know, and be supportive in the way that they're letting you know is going to be supportive for them.
That's a really important point, that attitude of curiosity. Tell me more. Yep. And
Yeah.
sharing of yourself. Very important. I see that Jace is answering another question. Chris had asked, Jessica, any trainings you can recommend to be better allies and competent therapists?
That is a great question. So Seacoast Outright does offer a training generally. So definitely feel free to reach out. I know there are also a number of other folks who do trainings, but I think there is definitely a need in the state for some comprehensive training for therapists on LGBT issues. I'm not sure what Jace is going to answer, but I'm interested to see. We have been trying to work with a few of the mental health centers to have folks who are competent go into some of the community mental health centers and act as a supervisor to some of the younger therapists, who are then able to get that supervision from someone who has that specialty. So it's definitely on a small scale right now, but hoping to expand and hoping that there are more and more opportunities for folks to learn beyond a 90-minute or 120-minute presentation. It's really important to have ongoing training from folks who really know what it's like on the ground as a therapist.
Absolutely. And as we said, we need more therapists of color. We need more therapists from the LGBT community. So making it easier for folks to enter the field is one thing. I did just want to share the slide that pardon me here, strategies to prevent suicide. So this is from the CDC, so the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So economic supports, we know poverty is a risk factor, access and delivery of suicide care. So we know that's lacking, particularly in the Black community. So that's an important point. Create protective environments. We talked about schools coming around, and even us as individuals being able to connect with kids, be that person in a kid's life. Promote connectedness through norm groups, community engagement. Sean certainly talked about that at length, that we're all human and we need to join together. Teach coping and problem solving skills. So social emotional learning. Sean definitely is doing a boatload of that through the emotional CPR that he and his organization offer. Identify and support people at risk. So catching people early so that they don't get to the point where it becomes a crisis, and lessen harms and prevent future risks. So we know safe reporting and messaging around suicide, language use is just really important. Can I just ask, we are at time here. So Jessica and Sean, any last message that you want to send to folks? Any takeaway that you'd like people to have? Either one.
I'll let Jessica go first.
I would say be that one person in a kid's life, and to educate yourself, to go to more trainings, and then also to ask folks how that applies to them. So it's important that we both ask people the right questions, but also not rely solely on them to educate us. And so it's really important that we are, doing our own research and understanding what certain terms might mean, but then also when speaking to a youth saying, what does that mean for you? And how can I support you? Versus relying on them to educate you about everything LGBT, right? Or everything about their specific community. So really important to ask the right questions, be that one person, and recognize that you know more than you know. So just making sure you're tapping into that and reaching out when you need support.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess. Sean?
Yeah, I kind of piggyback off of Jess and being that one person, but I would say, remember that you too can be the solution, right? That yes, you can say, hey, it seems like you may need to speak to a professional, but in this moment, I'm here present with you. It really goes a long way. And I think just really, if there's something specific, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's Black suicide rates, whether it's anxiety as a whole, no matter what it is, if the mental health crisis as a whole is something that is important to you, educate yourself on it. I shouldn't say ask the right questions, because all questions are important. Ask the questions that need to be asked for you to feel competent in understanding. And then remember that you are the solution, right? You're part of the solution here. Because one of the biggest problems that we have right now is that we have a higher rate of people being disconnected more than ever before. And so in order to be connected, we have to have people to connect to. Right? We have to have people that we can trust in our communities, that we can be vulnerable with in our communities, and that we can do that work to remove the shame that we're feeling, that we feel like we could do that work because they're allowing us that space to do that work. And so be a person that people want to listen to, and that the people will come and talk to. That's the greatest advice I can give. And more importantly, I think, don't ever let anybody tell you that you don't have the skill set to support another person. And remember the language that I'm using here. I said support. I didn't say therapize, right? I didn't say do clinical work. I said support. So remember, don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't support another human being. And especially don't let your mind tell you that you can't do that, because we do that ourselves sometimes. We all have the ability to utilize our human experience to connect with other people. And that's exactly what we should do.
Be an ally. Excellent. Thank you both so very much for being with us for this important topic. Jace has put lots of resources into the chat. Do remember 988 rapid response. If you're struggling, if you need help, do reach out. Any thoughts of suicide, please dial 988. Thank you all for joining us today. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation. It is in the chat. After you fill it out, you'll automatically get a certificate of attendance. And just a reminder, a recording of the discussion today will be posted on the education page of onwardnh.org. You'll receive an email in the next couple of days with a link to that website and the evaluation. If you have any questions, reach out to me, mwagner@naminh.org. We look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about critical time intervention. Until then, take care. Bye, y'all.